Gina Loudon filling in today for your host, Brian Fisher, and I am so pleased to be with you and pleased to bring you my next guest, one of my favorites on my own show, and somebody who seems to be able to just give real life easy answers to our very honest questions. For many of us, there are simple questions that really eat away at our faith that we feel we're unable to defend or articulate. Maybe we understand it in our heart, but it's just hard to find the words. That's what my next guest is a professional at. He is a graduate of Denver Seminary and San Jose State University. Bob Siegel has two great books, A Call to Radical Discipleship and I'd Like to Believe in Jesus, But. I became familiar with him when he spoke at my own church, which is Skyline Church in San Diego, California. Welcome to the Dr. Gina Show. Sorry, not the Dr. Gina Show today, the Brian Fisher Focal Point Show. Bob Siegel. Knew I was going to make that mistake at some point. How are you today, Bob?
It's good, Gina. Good to hear from you again.
Good to have you. And so many of my folks on Facebook have written out some of their thoughts and their questions. One of the things is organized religion. Bob, how do you justify when there are so many different faiths and so many different religions with so many beliefs? It becomes sort of a thing where people, I think, want to take all those different faiths and all those religion and say, all right, you know what, it's also confusing. There's so much noise. This is my faith. God and I stand alone, and I don't really need all that pesky doctrine. What do you say to that?
Well, for one thing, the different religions completely contradict themselves. And anybody who's ever taken a basic philosophy class might remember the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. He came up with a very simple rule. It's foundational to any class in logic and philosophy. It's called the law of non-contradiction. And what that law simply says is if you have two truth claims and they contradict themselves, they cannot both be true. They may possibly both be false, but they cannot both be true. So if your husband, Dr. Gina, called you on the phone tonight and said, I'm going to be home for dinner, and yet I'm not going to be home for dinner, that would not make a whole lot of sense. And you would say to him, well, which one is it? Right. So when we look at the different religions of the world, they're not actually claiming to be one of many beautiful paths to God. They're claiming to be the only path. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but through me. And he's not the only one who said that. Muhammad made it very clear that if you didn't believe in Allah as God and in him as the true prophet, that you would go to hell. And in Hinduism, we're told that Brahman is God. And we're told that Brahman and the universe are one and the same thing. So whereas a Hindu looks at a tree and they say God is the tree, a Christian looks at a tree and says, no, God's not a tree. God made the tree. Those are very different views of God, and yet they both use the word God. So I would start by saying that these religions completely contradict. And if you have 10 different religions and they all contradict and they're either all false or only one of them is true. Now here's what's really interesting. Christianity is the only religion which actually offers evidence that it's true. The other religions will tell you to accept them by blind faith.
I like that. I like that. And I think that Christians need to know that and be willing to use that we are the only ones that actually offer evidence. That's an important talking point. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, in fact, a lot of Christians are unaware of that. They're unaware of what their own Bible teaches, because there'll be a lot of Christians that will also say, well, you have to accept it by faith. But the way the apostles in the New Testament defined faith and the way we define faith today are very different. The apostles defined faith in God as obedience to God. They did not define it as blindly following some being that may or may not exist.
I like that a lot, too. So tell me this. Wouldn't this all just be so much easier if God would just talk to us? I wish every day I'm like, God, just tell me. What do you want from me? And I know so many people who say he spoke to people in the Bible. Why doesn't he speak to us today?
Well, first of all, he does speak to us today. The whole message of Christianity is that one can have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I discovered this firsthand because I was raised as an atheist Jew and did not become a Christian to go through the back door until my second year in college. On a Monday, I was not a believer. On a Tuesday, I was, and that was because I had an encounter with the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And the promise of the New Testament is that God's Spirit will actually take up residence and join with our spirit. And we're told in Romans chapter 8, this is how we know we've become children of God, that his Spirit is testifying with our spirits. I would start by saying that is just exactly what God wants to do. He does want to speak. He does want to make himself known.
And so some of the questions that I think are really hard for people to answer are questions that seem so outlandish in today's culture. When I married a Christian Scientist, he's no longer a Christian Scientist by the grace of God totally. But when I married him, his two biggest obstacles were number one, Adam and Eve, and number two, Noah's Ark. Those two things sounded so crazy to him. There was just no way there was a shred of truth in those. Talk to us about how to talk to our friends who believe in things like Christian Science, where they say, yeah. Go ahead.
It's very understandable, and I used to feel the same way, but let's start with Adam and Eve. What is the story of Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve tells us that the world was once a paradise, and the world has been invaded by some kind of evil. That is just exactly what we see in nature. We can go out to a beach and stare at this beautiful sunset, but on the beach you can also have tidal waves. In nature we have earthquakes, hurricanes, diseases. Look what happened in the Philippines this week. And yet the world has forests and snow-capped mountains. And then in human beings, we see love. We see the love that parents have for their children. We see the love between a husband and wife, the camaraderie of friends. But we see racism and hate and murder and rape, and we've had the institution of slavery. So human beings are this beautiful species that seem to have been invaded by evil. The world is a beautiful place that looks like a paradise invaded. What Genesis does is it explains how that happened. It explains that God gave the world over to human beings, but human beings chose not to obey him, and so he withdrew himself from the world, and that left it open for evil forces. As for the flood, almost every major ancient civilization has their own flood story. And every civilization from every continent has evidence that there had once been a worldwide flood. Even if you go to the top, highest mountain in the world, in the Himalayas, Mount Everest, there's actual fossilization of sea life right on top of the mountain. There's abundant evidence that the world did have a flood. It doesn't even
I don't think, Bob,
rain.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't think it's the flood part that people have a problem with. I think it's the putting all the animals on a boat part.
Okay, well, even an evolutionist with their belief in microevolution, and microevolution is different from macro. Macro says that all species were once related, whereas micro says that there has been evolution within the bird species, within the feline species. So we're only talking about one kind of bird, one kind of cat, one kind of canine. That's far less animals. And it's not that Noah went out into the forest and rounded up the animals and checked to see if they were male and female. The Bible says that the animals came themselves to the ark.
Which they would, of course, if there was a flood around them, they would naturally be flocking to the only dry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We see animals do that all the time. Why do swallows fly south for the winter? We see that all the time. I think, Gina, when people take a second look at those stories and get beyond the initial stereotype reaction, they really make a whole lot more sense than they think.
I like that. One of the things that has always been one of those questions that I'm embarrassed to admit, but this has always been a hard thing for me. One is I've read in the Bible that there are no oceans in heaven. I live on the beach. I love the oceans. I can't imagine there are no oceans. And the second one that I want you to address.
That's
Go
all
ahead.
based
Go with that
on
one.
one verse in Revelation where they talk about the New Jerusalem, and Revelation is very, very symbolic. It's not written like a lot of the rest of the Bible. With all that symbolism, and we need to remember that John was seeing a vision, it's possible that ocean is there. I'm a big ocean lover myself. I live in San Diego because I love the ocean. That's exactly why I live here. So I wouldn't worry too much about that because there's so much symbolism in Revelation that we may not need to take that particular passage literally.
I like that. The other one is pets. Please put our minds at ease because I love my little French bulldog Gipper.
I remember this came up when I was on your show. The Bible doesn't say anything about animal souls. Sometimes Christians do, and we need to beware. Christians sometimes will supply information and fill in blanks that the Bible left blank. My own belief is similar to a belief that C.S. Lewis developed, and he was of the opinion that if our own pets are important to us and we are important to God, then that would make our pets important to God. So if you had an animal that you spent a lot of time with, I believe you may just see that animal resurrect in the resurrected kingdom. We do see a little bit about animals in the resurrected kingdom when it talks about animals that had previously preyed on each other lying down with each other. So I think we may just see pets in heaven, but here I'm speculating, but I would call that reasonable speculation.
And I think, too, and I appreciate that, too. I think, too, just knowing God's Spirit and knowing his love for us and knowing the perfection of his eternal home for us, which is our true home, whatever manifestation of these things, these experiences, which are really spiritual. I mean, your experience standing next to an ocean is a spiritual experience. Your experience loving a pet. I mean, it makes no sense that this stinky little dependent thing that chews your shoes and goes to the bathroom in your house when it's a puppy, that it means so much to you spiritually. That's a spiritual connection we have to that dog. I don't think it's a mistake that's spelled backward. It's God. I think it's a manifestation of part of his spirit he wants us to know in our pets. And therefore, it makes sense to me that our Abba Father is going to have either that or something even better and beyond our ability to comprehend in heaven. Don't you think?
Yeah, I agree, and he's certainly capable of doing it. If he can resurrect a human being, he can certainly resurrect an animal. So the only question that would remain would be, what would be his reason for not doing it? And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he wouldn't do it. So again, I that doesn't mean I know for sure, but I think it's a fairly safe bet that we'll see our pets in heaven. I have to say, though, that I have a couple of cats that are probably going straight to hell, but other people's cats, perhaps.
I love that, and I think I might have had a couple of those as well. I'm going to go ahead and confide right here.
Yeah. Certainly mosquitoes. Or, the biggest question in the Bible is why didn't Noah swat those 2 flies? So
yeah, exactly. All right, well, our listeners have some questions for you.
Okay.
Bob, if you can stay with us through the break, the number for our listeners is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Bring us your toughest questions. Be honest, the one that you just can't reconcile, because we're going to talk about lies this whole show. This is your chance to prove you're an honest person, and you're going to ask your most difficult question to our guest, Bob Siegel. Coming up right after this, you stay tuned to Focal Point here on AFR. I'm Dr. Gina. Happy to be with you today.